In the summer of 1998, the World Wrestling Federation was going through a resurgence, thanks to its major stars such as Stone Cold, Sable, and D-Generation X, as well as the more over-the-top attitude that would soon become a staple every Monday night. The company was now fighting back in the weekly ratings war against WCW. USA Network, the home of the WWF's major programming, wanted to capitalize on its success and would negotiate with the Federation to add another weekend program onto its schedule that would carry over the viewers of Raw in the War Zone. The WWF originally planned for this new show to be done on a trial basis. If it turned out to be a success, they would have a new second weekly show, or a B show, that would allow more airtime for their roster and to help further build ongoing storylines. Sunday Night Heat first premiered on August 2nd, being taped prior to Raw with the setup mostly untouched. The inaugural episode starts with Mr. McMahon introducing his son Shane as a part of the Heat announce team, with Shane O'Mac often calling the action alongside Jim Cornette and later on Kevin Kelly. Appearances from DX and Stone Cold went along with the first matches in the show's history. Edge defeating Jeff Jarrett in the opener after interference from Tennessee Lee backfired. The Headbangers and Darren Drozdov beating Kai and Tai in a 6-man tag match. D'Lo retaining his European Championship over Ken Shamrock after interference from Dan Severn. And Heat's first main event had Owen Hart and The Rock of the Nation beating Kane and Mankind by countout. Despite the show's match quality being on par with Raw this time, the first episode of Heat would end up drawing a 3.7 Nielsen rating. And after several weeks of maintaining similar or slightly higher ratings in the first episode, Heat would officially stick around as a new weekend program for the WWF. Because of Heat airing on Sundays, the show would coincide with one of the WWF's monthly pay-per-view events. These episodes would be treated as pre-shows that had video packages to hype the card for later in the night, several matches with lower card talent, and angles or promos that usually centered on the main event level bouts for the show. The first instance of this took place at the end of the Highway to Hell at SummerSlam on August 30th. Too Much defeated LOD 2000 in the opening match, during the middle of the storyline that brought Hawk's personal issues onto WWF television. Gangrel remained undefeated, getting a win over Dustin Rhodes. The DOA beat Vader and Bradshaw after some miscommunication between Big Van and Justin Hawk, setting up a match between the two for the next In Your House event. It would wrap up with Stone Cold destroying a hearse that he believed had Kane and The Undertaker inside, but would later be revealed during SummerSlam that that hearse actually belongs to Mankind, as he had gotten it for a special SummerSlam ride and would now have to take it up to the Briscoe Brothers body shop. He would continue to feature major angles that would carry over into the pay-per-views, with a perfect example taking place on September 27th prior to Breakdown in Your House, as Vince tried to put Austin in a cage match against Mark Henry, with Kane and The Undertaker at ringside to further stack the odds against him. But the plan would quickly fall apart, as Chyna brawled backstage with Henry, getting revenge for Triple H's injury at the hands of the future World's Strongest Man. On top of that, Vince had to deal with a crew member who locked them both inside of the cage, one that looked all too familiar.
You see the size of Kane? Kane right here in front of us. Oh no!
It's Austin! It's Austin! McMahon's in the cage with Austin! McMahon! Austin's on McMahon! Austin is on Vince McMahon!
Get him off! Get in there, Kane!
Here comes Undertaker and Kane, and there goes Steve Austin! There's some fight left in the rattlesnake! The rattlesnake is not gonna roll over and play dead! He is not giving up hope! Steve Austin has outwitted Mr. McMahon!
Yeah, well, either it's my pops. My pop never gives up hope. What a wild night we have had here, man. Heat has been hot. However, it's not over yet. What is going to happen, Cornette, when we come back? I don't know, man.
The October 11th episode featured the first appearance of a future women's champion, as well as the final TV match of a former big name in the company. Jack Willing retained the WWF Women's Championship against Starla Saxton in the opener, before she and Sable would brawl afterwards. Starla would jump over the WCW soon after this appearance, later becoming Miss Madness and Mona during her time in Atlanta, before returning to the Federation years later as Molly Holly. The show also featured Edge defeating Vader in what ended up being Big Van's last televised WWF match of his nearly 3-year stint, before returning to Japan soon after. The corporation and its new champion, The Rock, would continue to prevent Mankind from getting anywhere near the WWF Championship in the final months of 1998, and continued to stack the odds against him at every chance. This occurred again on the December 20th episode of Heat, where Mick would face Rocky, Ken Shamrock, and the Big Boss Man in what was supposed to be a fatal 4-way match that really was treated more as a 3-on-1 handicap match. Despite making brief comebacks, all 3 champions of the corporation would take their turns giving a beatdown to Mrs. Foley's baby boy, with Mankind eventually able to lock in the mandible claw on Boss Man before getting caught off by The Rock, and soon after getting pinned with a rock bottom on the chair and a corporate elbow for good measure. Vince would even put his own version of Mr. Sacco into Mankind's mouth, before DX would come out to make the save and to close the show. The former Cactus Jack and Dude Love would get one over on Vince and his stooges by winning the WWF title on the first Raw to air in 1999, but the feud between him and Rocky would only get more intense soon after. As the Denver Broncos and Atlanta Falcons faced off in the 33rd Super Bowl on January 31st, the most memorable episode of Sunday Night Heat would take place on USA. While the undercard featured Boss Man and Shamrock getting singles wins over Jeff Jarrett and Owen Hart respectively, the episode is best remembered for halftime heat. With a unique match happening during the halftime show, Mankind looked to win back the WWF Championship from the Great One, after losing it in controversial fashion in their I Quit match at the Royal Rumble. The two would face off again in the WWF's first ever empty arena match. The pre-taped bout featured 0 fans in attendance, Vince McMahon doing solo commentary, and a heated rivalry between the future Rock and Sock connection, as both men used every part of the building to inflict damage onto each other, including the arena chairs, destroying catering, an arena office,
Oh, well, what do you know? How convenient. The phone's ringing. Yeah, SmackDown Hotel. That's right. Well, no, Mankind's not available right now. He's a little busy. His mouth is full with The Rock's foot in his mouth.
and even out of the loading dock. But in the end, Mankind used a forklift with kegs placed on top to weigh The Rock down low enough to get the 3 count and win back his WWF Championship. The match also was a major success for USA, as it gained a 6.6 rating on the same night that the Broncos would go on to win their second consecutive Super Bowl in Miami. One of the more infamous matches in the show's history would air on March 7th, as Bradshaw and Farouk faced former WCW and ECW Tag Team Champions Public Enemy. Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge had refused to do a planned spot in the match that involved a table, and Bradshaw and Farouk, with their reputation, took this as well as you would imagine, with things getting ugly as soon as the bell rang. The duo later known as the APA quickly dropped Public Enemy using a chair and the ring steps. Bradshaw would send Grunge crashing through the table at ringside, before Rocco Rock would get hit with a damning chair shot to the head. The match would eventually get called off, but both acolytes continued pummeling Grunge and Flyboy and teaching them a lesson, with this encounter being one of Public Enemy's last televised appearances in the Federation before getting released by the end of the month. Also occurring on this episode was Tiger Ali Singh calling out 1996 Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle and offering him $500 if he dared to blow his nose onto the American flag. Kurt refused, despite the offer being upped to $10,000, as Angle chose instead to blow his nose on Tiger Singh's Indian flag. And as Singh tried to attack Kurt in retaliation, Angle would instead suplex and take him down rather quickly, before Tiger Ali Singh would leave the ring, as Angle stood tall in his hometown of Pittsburgh. With this being a brief showcase of the man who would go on to become a rising star in the WWF the following year. Sunday Night Heat would make its WrestleMania debut on March 28th, prior to the 15th edition of the event in Philadelphia. Vince would appear with The Big Show to make the WWF Championship match between Stone Cold and The Rock no disqualification, in the hope of crushing Austin's dream of winning back the title. Jack Willing and Ivory would face off in singles action, with Jackie gaining the win before Tori would come out to make the save against the Pretty Mean Sisters. Thanks to interference from Jeff Jarrett and Owen Hart, D'Lo and Test would go on to win a tag team battle royal to earn a title shot against the two later at WrestleMania, with Double J and the Blackheart retaining the gold. Heat would end with The Big Show and Mankind brawling backstage before their Mania encounter, with Show completely ignoring Stone Cold, who managed to get into the building and to his WWF Championship match unharmed. In the fallout from WrestleMania 15, with the disbanding of DX and The Rock getting kicked out of the corporation to become one of the company's top babyfaces, the main event scene in the Federation would start to change over the next several months, as two former degenerates would be given an opportunity to be thrown into the mix with some of the other major names of that era, and suffice to say, one push ended up lasting, the other, not so much. Heat on July 11th featured that in-ring promo from The Rock. Whilst he was in a feud with Triple H, the Great One would also have to deal with that year's King of the Ring winner Billy Gunn, as Mr. Ass had inserted himself into the feud between Rocky and Hunter. And frankly, I think we've all heard this promo at least one point or another, so rather than trying to summarize it, I'll just cut straight to the highlights.
The Rock understands what took place. The night you won King of the Ring, you got down on your knees, put your little hands together, and you said a prayer, and it sounded like this. Oh dear God. You see, my name's Billy, and I just won King of the Ring, but there's one problem. Everybody still thinks that I absolutely suck. And then at that point, Billy, your house started to shake, the heavens opened up, and God himself spoke to you and said this, Bob, but my name's Billy. It doesn't matter what your name is. You are absolutely right. You do suck. But there is one thing and one thing only you can do. You must go find the man who is simply electrifying. You must go find The Rock. Oh my God, anybody but The Rock. Know your role and shut your mouth. And then, Billy, as fear went through your body, tears went down your cheek, and piss rolled down your leg, your house started to shake again, the clouds parted, the heavens opened, and what seemed like millions of voices all said to you in unison, Jabroni, if you smell what The Rock is cooking.
And what most may not remember is that Billy Gunn actually responded to this promo immediately afterwards.
Yeah, you see, for the first time in his life, The Rock is actually jealous of someone else. And that's me. You see, because I'm the 1999 King of the Ring. You see, I'm better looking than he is, and I'm a way better athlete than him, and I've got an ass that makes his look like Rosie O'Donnell's. And tonight I'm gonna do what The Rock couldn't even do, and that's make Tess' ass famous.
While this promo alone wasn't responsible for killing Billy's singles push, it helped to build a brief feud between the two that culminated at that year's SummerSlam in a Kiss My Ass match that The Rock would go on to win. The other push would become cemented 2 weeks later on the Heat Before Fully Loaded, as Triple H and Jim Ross took part in a sit-down interview. Hunter talked about becoming the WWF Champion at SummerSlam, and how at this point in his career, he doesn't want anyone's help to get him the title.
So you're saying that in 4 weeks at SummerSlam, you will become the WWF Champion without Chyna's help?
You're right. I don't need anybody else, JR. This is about me. I don't need to be in a clique anymore. I don't need to be in DX anymore. This is about me. It's about me reaching my goals.
He also showed his resentment towards JR and management for holding him back ever since the Clique curtain call.
It's about 4 years ago, Madison Square Garden. I walked to the ring to say goodbye to my friends, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Shawn Michaels. Who got punished for that, JR? Me. I did. You know why? Because you didn't have the Nobody in the office had that to do it to anybody else. Well, you know what? That makes me sick in my stomach. Every time I look at you guys, it makes me sick to think what you did to me, holding me back. You guys talk about being students of the game. I am the game, JR. There is nobody that eats, sleeps, or breathes this business more than me.
Before saying that regardless of whoever else was involved, SummerSlam would be all about him finally achieving the one goal that he felt was taken from him.
It's about Jesse Ventura officiating that matchup.
To hell with Jesse Ventura, to hell with The Rock, to hell with Austin, to hell with The Undertaker. I own all their asses. Jesse Ventura, I could care less. You want to promote SummerSlam around him, go right ahead. But when it's said and done, SummerSlam is about me. It's about nobody else. It's about me. It's about me getting what I deserve in this business, and that is what I want, and that is becoming the WWF Champion.
Triple H would fulfill his prophecy soon after, becoming the WWF Champion and later cementing himself as the company's biggest heel, who over the next several years was a constant in the main event scene, with this arguably being the early signs of what would later become his reign of terror. Heading into the fall of 1999, a major shift in the WWF's weekly programming would take place, as with UPN getting their own program, SmackDown, the Federation began using this new 2-hour show to carry over its major storylines and feature the top stars on the card. On top of that, matches for Heat would also be taped prior to SmackDown on Tuesday nights. And while it wasn't immediate, Heat would slowly start to become more of an enhancement show, with recaps of Raw and SmackDown now in place of the live promos that would have been taped exclusively for the show a year prior. Heat during the later half of 1999 would regularly feature a segment called The Hotspot, later renamed to Plays of the Week, essentially a recap package of a particular superstar or ongoing storyline with a licensed song from a major artist playing. Not to mention that the pre-show heats for the pay-per-views during this time also had several video packages using licensed music of this era, and while it is a really cool aspect of the shows when they originally aired, it's likely one of, but probably not the biggest reason, as to why some of the other Attitude Era episodes of Heat haven't been made officially available yet by WWE. With the new millennium underway, Heat would go into the year 2000 as the home for a title that had been dormant for over a year. As light heavyweight champion Gilbert emerged on the February 13th episode, wanting to disprove the claims that he was a closet champion for the majority of his run, and offered an open challenge for the title. It would be answered by the former Papi Chulo, now going by S.A. Rios, along with his new manager, Lita. The match would last under a few minutes, with SA hitting the moonsault to get the win and end Dwayne Gill's 15-month reign with the light heavyweight title. Lita would also get to hit a moonsault, with Rios counting the pin for her as both quickly left the ring. Not only did this show feature the debut of one of the most popular female stars that WWF would ever have, but also showed an attempt to revive a division that the company had previously cared very little for. The Light Heavyweight Championship would continue to be featured on Heat, with the title going from SA to Scotty 2 Hotty and eventually to Dean Malenko, who he himself would hold on to the title for the majority of the calendar year, as he successfully defended it against Taka Michinoku, Jacqueline, and on the July 23rd episode against Crash Holly just prior to the Fully Loaded pay-per-view. Crash was a constant highlight by this point of the Attitude Era, with his segments involving the 24/7 rule of the Hardcore Championship. His antics would carry over onto Sunday Night Heat, and soon after becoming a staple of the show. He first retained his Hardcore title against Mark Henry and referee Jack Doan on April 9th. He would also get the opportunity to challenge for the European Championship on June 11th against Latino Heat Eddie Guerrero.
China apparently in a conciliatory move. Good sportsmanship there for the ninth wonder of the world. And look at Crash. Is he blushing? I think he is. He's as red as a beet.
As well as Kurt Angle for his WWF Championship in November, but would end up coming short in both of those matches respectively. The June 11th episode of Heat also featured a fatal 4-way match for the Intercontinental Championship, as Chris Benoit defended against Chris Jericho, Hardcore Holly, and Val Venus, with his new manager Trish Stratus. Even with the limited time all 4 guys were given, the action remained intense and fast-paced, with everyone getting in a big move before someone else would end up breaking up the pin. The match would end with Chris Benoit covering Bob Holly for the win right when Val Venus tapped to the walls of Jericho at the 3 count. Despite coming up short in that title match on Heat, the Big Valboski would get another opportunity at the IC title against Rikishi the following month on SmackDown. Val would go on to win his first Intercontinental Championship, albeit thanks to interference from Taz. It was able to bring some gold to the stable of wrestlers that were managed by a woman who she herself would later go on to become one of the more prominent names in the Federation's women's division. The former fitness model Trish Stratus would make her WWF debut on the March 19th Heat, as she stood on the ramp watching Test defeating Gangrel, and later in the show when Albert got the win over Joey Abs, and had both men walking with her to the back. Trish would unite the two as the TNA tag team that would soon go into feuds with the Dudleys and the Hardy Boys throughout the year. One of TNA's encounters with the Hardys and Lita occurred in a 6-person elimination tag match that main evented the July 2nd episode of Heat. Albert would be the first one eliminated, before Lita finally got her hands on Trish and hit the moonsault quickly to eliminate her future legendary rival and give Test a 3-on-1 disadvantage against Team Extreme. But Test would be able to fight back, as he used the ropes to pin Jeff after he had missed a Swanton Bomb. A pop handle slam to rid Matt, and stand tall with the victory after he knocked Lita down with his signature big boot. Another major change would hit Sunday Night Heat, as the WWF negotiated with Viacom to bring Raw onto the national network. The company's other weekend programming, including Heat, would no longer air on USA. But rather than joining the other shows on TNN, Heat would instead go live in its regular time slot on MTV, in theory being a more modern incarnation of the Rock and Wrestling Connection. Thus, the final Heat to air on the USA Network occurred on September 24th, prior to the Unforgiven pay-per-view, with it mainly consisting of video packages to build up the card. But the interactions in between with Michael Cole, Kevin Kelly, and Taz is the most memorable part of this episode, as Taz started calling Heat his show, and that MTV actually stood for More Taz Victims, something that he would reiterate over the next several weeks.
This is like old times, just like stupid thing. This is like old times.
What do you mean old times?
Good old MC and Taz doing color together. We're the A team, the King, and JR, the B team. A team, B team. Just like old times, bro.
Oh, just like old times. So you mean you're going to be joining me for the rest of Heat here before Unforgiven?
Yeah, exactly. Of course, I'm here, Taz, and good old MC.
The show ended with Kurt Angle cutting an in-ring promo, saying that his match with Triple H on the pay-per-view was more about fighting for what was right, and that he would make it up to Stephanie later in the night. The first Sunday Night Heat on MTV emanated from its new weekly home at WWF New York in Times Square on October 1st, with Heat also getting a completely new look. The show now featured celebrities as the new co-host, with DJ Scribble and Rebecca Buddick on the first floor with the fans, while Michael Cole and Taz were at the broadcast position on the second level to do live commentary for the matches taped that week. It is worth noting that Heat during this time would have two different airings, as Channel 4 in the UK, for example, aired the show with extra matches taped in place of the WWF New York segments that aired live on MTV. The in-ring action will also have studio commentary done by the coach and Michael Hayes in place of Cole and Taz doing live play-by-play. The inaugural MTV episode featured a live appearance from Stone Cold, William Regal beating Crash Holly in the opening bout, Dean Malenko retaining his light heavyweight title against Taka Michinoku, Eddie Guerrero retained his European Championship against the Road Dogg, and the Dudley Boys main eventing Heat by putting Bull Buchanan of Right to Censor through a table in their signature match, before getting ambushed by the rest of RTC after the bell. Heat's format on MTV originally had a mix of matches, segments that had the co-hosts interacting with WWF superstars, and a live performance from popular bands such as Disturbed, Cypress Hill, and even the WWF debut of metal rock band Fozzy, whose lead singer Mongoose McQueen was the alter ego of Chris Jericho during the band's early years. By the end of 2000 and going into 2001, the live performances would be gone, as well as Scribble and Rebecca no longer being the co-hosts, instead having different WWF superstars guest hosting the show every Sunday. Stephanie McMahon appeared on MTV in the heat, pun partially intended, of her love triangle with Triple H and Kurt Angle, even joining Taz and Cole to do live commentary for one of Hunter's last ever matches on the show against Perry Saturn. The Rock appeared in December, hosting a pie-eating contest with Cole, Taz, and a handful of fans at WWF New York. Saturn and Terry Runnels would appear in February, pulling pranks on the crew throughout the entire show before eventually getting kicked out. Kai and Tai would issue an open challenge on the February 11th episode of Heat, wanting to prove that they were the most evil tag team in the WWF. The challenge would get answered by the Brothers of Destruction, this being the first time Undertaker and Kane have teamed together on the show since its earliest episodes in 1998. The match went as you would expect, with Taka and Funaki getting beaten in mere moments and then getting laid out with a powerbomb and a last ride, respectively. That week also featured another appearance from the WWF champion Kurt Angle, as he took on S.A. Rios in a non-title match. While getting frustrated with the disrespect from the crowd, Kurt explained that he had answered this challenge issued by S.A. for a match on Heat, before then telling the former light heavyweight champion,
And S.A., congratulations! Because after tonight, you will have the honor of telling your future illegitimate grandchildren that you lost to the very best. It's true. Or as they say in Spanish, El Muy Truo Arriba.
What a jerk. Is that even the right words?
No.
Kurt would take the early advantage once the match got underway, but his overconfidence costed him momentarily, as S.A. used his speed to make a comeback, even getting a close near fall on Angle after hitting a top rope Hurricane Rana. but his moonsault attempt would get stopped after Kurt got the knees up, with Angle soon after hitting the Olympic Slam for the victory. But chose to give 2 more slams to SA after the bell, sending a message to The Rock ahead of their title match at No Way Out. WrestleMania returned to a stadium for the first time in nearly a decade at Houston's Astrodome on April 1st. The heat before the 17th edition of Mania mostly featured video packages and interviews to continue hyping all the big matches, highlights of events from WWF Fan Access Weekend, and a bonus match, with Grandmaster Sexay and Steve Blackman falling to X-Pac and Just Incredible of X Factor mere moments before the grandest stage of them all officially began on pay-per-view. This format would slightly alter, but mostly remain the same for future WrestleMania episodes of Heat on MTV. In the aftermath of WrestleMania 17, the purchase of WCW would lead to a planned Invasion storyline after building the brand with its own roster and new weekly program. The WWF would give this new WCW a test run in early July, with the infamous Booker T and Buff Bagwell main event on Raw, as well as SmackDown featuring Kidman winning the Cruiserweight Championship from Shane Helms, and DDP unsuccessfully challenging Booker for the World Heavyweight title thanks to The Undertaker. Sunday Night Heat would also feature a WCW title match in the main event of the July 8th episode. While X Factor showed up at WWF New York to talk about what they would do to some of the WCW roster at the upcoming Invasion pay-per-view, Tajiri defeated Jerry Lynn in the opener, Rhino gored K-Quick to get the win, and with the WCW Tag Team titles defended for the first time in a WWF reign, Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire retained over Sean Stasiak and Chris Kanyon ahead of facing the APA at Invasion. Heat's lineup through the second half of 2001 would center on matches between the WWF roster against WCW and ECW wrestlers. One match in particular pitted 2 men with an historic rivalry in what would be their only encounter in the WWF. Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn had faced off many times before in ECW, often over the World Television title, with the two also competing on the company's final pay-per-view, Guilty as Charged, in January. Several months later, both men would continue their feud on the August 5th Heat, as Mr. Monday Night defended the Hardcore title for the Alliance against Jerry Lynn representing the WWF. Both men used their quickness and experience to outdo each other in the early stretch, before Mr. JL would send Rob to the floor, even hitting a dive over the barricade to RVD. After bringing a chair into the ring, Van Dam body slams Jerry onto it, but misses the landing of the Rolling Thunder after Lynn quickly moves away. The former TV champions then trade several near falls, and after a back and forth sequence, a low blow helps Van Dam set up the split-legged moonsault, but Lynn is able to use the chair to block it. The whole Evans show tries to fly off the top before getting caught off by Lynn, as JL moves the chair to hit a superplex onto it, but he himself gets shoved off the middle rope before RVD then hits the 5-star frog splash with the chair underneath Lynn's back to get the win and to keep the Hardcore title within the Alliance. 2002 would mark the return of several names to the WWF, with that year's Royal Rumble match featuring Goldust, The Godfather, and Mr. Perfect all re-emerging in the Federation. With Hennig being a former 2-time Intercontinental Champion, he would look to win his third on Sunday night, March 24th, challenging new champion Rob Van Dam, who won the title from William Regal at WrestleMania the week prior. Perfect starts off with chops in the corner before Van Dam Irish whips into the opposite corner and then hits some shoulder thrusts as Perfect quickly heads outside to recover. Kurt gets in some offense, hitting the snapmare and locking in the abdominal stretch, but Rob escapes and mounts his comeback, ending with a super kick and a rolling thunder, only to get a 2 count when Perfect moves his foot onto the bottom rope. Hennig reverses the monkey flip in the corner and tries using the top rope for the leverage pin, but referee Mike Chioda notices. As Perfect confronting Chioda allows Van Dam to get up, hit a spinning wheel kick, and the frog splash to put away Mr. Perfect and retain the Intercontinental Championship. The week after would begin the company's brand extension, with talent now exclusive to either Raw or SmackDown, marking March 31st as the final Sunday Night Heat before the brand split goes into effect. As well as the last episode to be taped prior to SmackDown, as moving forward, Heat would now be taped prior to Raw on Mondays and only feature that show's roster. The other big change was that Heat would no longer take place every week at WWF New York, now with everything including interviews and segments taking place inside the arena. Women's Champion Jazz defeated Molly Holly in a non-title match. Lance Storm superkicking Scotty 2 Hottie for the win. Edge and Goldust had a very aggressive back and forth encounter, with Goldust attacking at ringside, using chokes and hard Irish whips into the corner, before the future Rated R superstar would outsmart Goldust from the Shattered Dreams and hit the spear to get the win. And the main event saw William Regal retaining the European Championship and keeping it exclusive to Raw over his former tag team partner Tajiri. He would now feature a new commentary team, Raven and the Coach, as they would call the action or run down the pay-per-view cards every week. A familiar face in Crash would go one-on-one with Scott Hall in the Bad Guys Only Heat match on the April 7th show. Crash started with some quick offense against the former Razor before Hall caught Crash off the ropes to hit a fallaway slam. Scott kept the offense in the corner and would follow up by locking the abdominal stretch that transitioned into a grounded headlock. The former Diamond Stud hit a back suplex off the middle rope before setting Crash up for the Razor's Edge to get the victory in his only appearance on Sunday Night Heat. With the company getting the F out, WWE's Sunday night program would slowly begin to turn into Stevie Night Heat, as the former leader of RTC would retain the Hardcore Championship against Bradshaw and Crash in the summer, but losing on a few of the pre-show pay-per-view Heat episodes to Goldust, the Hurricane, and Spike Dudley, while continuing to compete almost regularly on the show. But it would soon turn around for Stevie, as his alliance with Victoria began later into the year, leading to him being featured again on Raw to help her retain the Women's Championship through early 2003. SmackDown's Cruiserweight division would get the spotlight on the Heat before Unforgiven on September 22nd, as Rey Mysterio faced a familiar rival in Chavo Guerrero. Both men start with some back and forth exchanges before Chavito does some limb work and gains the advantage, but Rey turns it around with a rebound arm drag. Chavo gets sent to the outside and thrown back after Rey hits a baseball slide head scissors. As the former Filthy Animal attempts a dive, he gets stopped with a dropkick, with Chavo starting to work on Rey's midsection to keep him grounded. He continues to target it by applying an abdominal stretch, while using the top rope to his advantage, but gets caught just before Rey escapes. Chavo quickly regains control, sending Rey's sternum first into the turnbuckles, with a follow-up dropkick and a grounded headlock. Rey reverses a power slam into a cradle pin, but Chavo goes for the back, putting Mysterio onto the top rope as he tries to take his mask off before Rey pushes him off and then hits a standing moonsault for a near fall. Chavo gets sent to the floor as Rey lands a springboard senton, but Chavo Jr. later reverses a sunset flip into the corner and attacks the back again for another 2 count. Rey's able to get back up as he fakes out a Hurricane Rana, leading to a spinning wheel kick that sets Chavo up for the 619 and the West Coast Pop, to help get the former WCW Cruiserweight Champion the victory mere moments before Unforgiven. The show also featured some new faces, with former WCW star Johnny Stamboli becoming a regular who faced Tommy Dreamer, Steven Richards, and Bradshaw for the Hardcore title throughout the remainder of the year. The other was Shelton Benjamin, who got his opportunity to compete on MTV and got wins over Shawn Stasiak, Crash, and Just Incredible during his time on Heat, before becoming a member of Team Angle months later. The tail end of 2002 would focus on Raven and his attempt to make a, quote, masterpiece.
You see, society is made up of people who act one way in public and another way in private. They do not have the courage to stand up to their own filthy convictions. Therefore, I will be brave for them, Howard. That is why I'm creating a masterpiece, so that people can stand back and look in 10, 20, 1,000 years and see what a brilliant, courageous savior that I am. I will be granted immortality. And since I have nothing but time on my hands, Howard, that is why I've held off starting my masterpiece. I thought I would give you people a chance to change. But obviously, you either can't or you won't. And therefore, I will do a demonstration. Each week, my masterpiece will consist of demonstrations using one of the 7 deadly sins, whether it be wrath or sloth or greed or pride, and one poor, unfortunate individual who will be sacrificed, Howard, because the needs of the many far outweigh the needs of the few. And these taken together as a whole, they will be my video masterpiece, because they will show the world what society is and show my courage in bringing it to them. Quote the Raven, nevermore.
First breaking the fingers of a young Aaron Stevens, convincing someone to eat a sandwich with his foot on it to teach a lesson in greed, and later confronting Jacqueline in the ring, scolding her for her pride and flaunting her body every week, before the Hurricane would come out to make the save and then defeat him in a match. The former leader of the flock would soon have to make a choice as to either continue with his masterpiece or to earn a chance to be a part of the Raw roster again. December 29th featured Raven taking on his longtime rival and the man responsible for costing him his spot on the roster months earlier, Tommy Dreamer, with Raven low-blowing Tommy to get the win and his spot back on the Red brand. This would be short-lived, however, as several weeks later, Raven would have his last WWE match, losing to Jeff Hardy on Raw before getting released from his contract the following week. 2003 would bring another big change to Heat, with an announcement that effective after WrestleMania 19, the show would move from MTV to the home of Raw as well as SmackDown's B-show Velocity, TNN. The final Heat of the MTV era took place on March 30th at Safeco Field, featuring John Cena in his WrestleMania debut taking shots at Fabulous and Jay-Z, or rather cardboard cutouts of them, as neither name was able to appear for a rap battle against Cena.
OMC, they said they send me to Fabulous and Jay-Z, but these gangsters didn't want to come up and see on TV. I'ma tell all of y'all why they wouldn't battle with me. Yo, man, it's Jay-Z, man. I'm fully focused Rockefeller, man. I got my girlfriend, man. I don't need to come to Seattle. I'm the king of New York. All I need in this life of sin is me and my girlfriend, Rockefeller. Okay then, Bonnie, where the hell is Clyde at? He ducked me like a bitch for a little battle rap. What you want me to do, man? Call out your fiance?
I'd have better competition battle rapping with Beyonce. He's the king of New York. I'm a kid from the cellar. Only way he stays hard is by rocking another fella. Sorry that I didn't have that much time to diss you. I focus on Fabulous. He's my real issue. Dude, you need to stick to doing Reebok commercials. He showed up and tapped out after hearing me in rehearsal. They didn't arrest you for your guns. It's because your rap sucked. Cops charged them with illegally possessing 2 nuts. Trade your throwback shirt for a skirt, you little whiner. And hike up your skirt. I can see your mangina. You want to blackball me? Well, at least I got a ball sack. If they lived at the sperm bank, they couldn't get their comeback. They talk about their ice and all the girls loving you. The only bush he see is by watching George W. I'm a main event player. These fools is in the background. I take over you, and then I take over SmackDown. They could do a show in their living room and still not sell out. This is the WWE. Get the F out. Yo, it's John Cena. Thugonomics hot as hell. He's just a bad idea. Like the XFL. I main event WrestleMania 20. You see me, you out of luck. You don't like what I'm saying? Well, I just don't give up.
As well as Lance Storm and Chief Morley, on behalf of William Regal, retained the World Tag Team titles over Kane and RVD thanks to Bubba Ray interfering behind the referee's back. But the titles would change hands the night after on Raw, with Kane and Van Dam defeating Morley and Storm and the Dudleys in a 3-way elimination tag match.